talk a little bit about my career path, some lessons learned along the way, what is communications, what kind of opportunities and career pathways are available, and what exactly it is that we do at Stellate. Just to give you a broader sense of who I am and what my mission is and what we do at Stellate as an organization. I would love for this to be a conversation. So feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions or want to dig into something a little bit further. I'm more than happy to take questions throughout, but we'll also try to leave a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A as well. All right, so let's get started. If I can advance. So first I want to start and say that no path, especially is perfect. It's easy for people to potentially look at my career and draw a perfect line from, undergrad to PhD to communications and now founding Stelly and running this business. But it is anything but clean. In fact, it's been quite messy. I've taken many detours along the way, made some big changes, and walked away from things when they weren't working. This is my path on the right, and we're going to use this as a little bit of an agenda for the first half or so of this talk. And you can see it's pretty messy. And even when I went to write this down, you could see some of it were dead ends or didn't make sense or were pivots. And instead of putting this into a nice bulleted agenda, I think it's important to see, just how messy career paths can be. Throughout this almost, gosh, 20 years career path, my mantra is explore fully, decide firmly, and keep moving towards what matters. And we'll see some of those themes kind of pulled out throughout our conversation today. So we're going to start kind of all the way at the top. Some of these things we're not going to get to, but happy to dig into them a little bit further. We're going to highlight just some of the key milestones in my path, ultimately getting down here to Stellate. But first, how did I even get into neuroscience? My first little pivot was actually I thought I would go into psychology. During high school, I was really interested in why people do things that are bad for them. It goes against all, evolutionary mechanisms to pass on genes. So why are people hurting themselves or engaging in detrimental behaviors such as addiction and eating disorders? This was kind of a question that was stuck in my head for a period of time. I actually wrote a high school dissertation on this subject. I would love to have a copy of it now because I'm sure in retrospect it's quite terrible. But this was something that I was really interested in and thought that, the path in psychology would help me answer some of the questions that, I didn't currently have answers to. Um, so my first, piece of advice is notice what keeps tugging at your attention. Pay attention to it, these ideas or questions or problems that you can't stop thinking about, because it's likely pointing you into something that's meaningful to you, something that you'll find interesting for a long period of time. So pay attention to those things. And, this happened early on when I was thinking about psychology and eventually neuroscience, but you'll see this as a theme throughout our conversation today as well. So this led me to do an undergrad in psychology at the University of Michigan. I really wanted to help people. I actually thought I'd become a clinical psychologist, specializing. At the time, I was really interested in eating disorders. And that obviously isn't what I am today. So let's figure out what happened. So I started my classes in clinical general psych, and I found nothing against psychology, but I found that we were talking about things in, very general terms or hypotheses, and I wanted to know the answer. I wanted to dig deeper into the brain and really figure out what was happening. neurons talking to each other to create behavior. And one of my professors was like, why don't you go explore neuroscience? Why don't you join a lab? Which to me, no one in my family had been in science. And this is what I thought being in a lab looked like, a bunch of old white dudes in lab coats, and didn't even think that that was a possibility for me. But I joined and I fell in love with doing experimental research. I joined a lab that was focused on understanding the reward like pathway, dopamine neurons from the ventral midbrain here to the ventral striatum, the nucleus accumbens in particular, and did a number of projects in that lab, was there for actually 5 years, stayed for an additional year to be a lab manager and finish up my honors thesis and get it published, but really trying to understand what motivates people's decision making, towards rewarding behavior, such as things that are good for you, like eating and engaging in social behavior, but then what goes awry with these systems and things like addiction, which became to be a big focus of mine. Um, and so I finished up my undergrad and wanted to go to grad school. I applied to a select number of places with folks that I had been introduced to and research that I was interested in. Um, MIT was on that list. I was really interested in joining Kay Tai's lab, who had just left Carl Diceroth's lab and was starting her own group. Um, and I bombed my interviews there, to be honest with you. I was on the wait list. It did not go well. My first question in my first interview was, your background in core sciences is poor. How do you explain that? Because I didn't take, uh, all of the classic, science and math classes. And so I didn't get admitted right away, but I had been in conversation with Kay at the time. She had come and seen some of the work that I was doing in my undergrad lab, and she really advocated for me, and basically used a golden ticket to get me into MIT and get me admitted because she said she wanted me in her lab, and for that I am super super grateful for. And so that is my second piece of advice is invest in your network, invest in it early, especially when you don't need anything, make connections with people. Relationships open doors, and more importantly, they help you see doors that don't even exist at times. I really think that I wouldn't be able to do Stellate today if it wasn't for the relationships that I started building as an undergrad. As Manuela said, we've known each other for a long time, and we recently did work together through Stellate. And being generous with your time and making connections is incredibly important at any career stage. So investing in your network, I truly believe is incredibly important. So I get into MIT, we're in grad school, and I wanted to go to grad school because some of all the cool tools and technology that is pretty commonplace now, such as optogenetics and in vivo calcium imaging, was just getting off the ground. This is some of my dissertation work looking at prefrontal cortical neurons that project to downstream regions such as the nucleus accumbens and the periaqueductal gray, basically trying to decipher how the prefrontal cortex or the brain regions involved in higher order cognitive functioning are modulated by dopamine and how they project to different brain regions to control reward versus aversive behavior, and using some of these cool new technologies and tools to really dissect circuitry in a way that we hadn't been able to do before, which was a lot of fun. It was like being in a neuroscience playground, and we really got to do some pretty incredible work with a really great group of individuals. So that led this is my basically my dissertation. It took me 5.5 years. Ultimately, I was fortunate to have this work published in Nature. Here are all of the figure panels. You can see a ton of work went into this. It was a huge team effort. I'm really, really proud of this work. It wasn't this project also wasn't super neat. There was a lot of dead ends, and we did a lot of work to kind of really figure out what was going on here. And then this is me in 2018 ultimately defending my thesis. And it was around this time I had a postdoc lined up. I was in the process of applying for fellowships where I realized I don't know if this is the path for me. And I defended my thesis, not really knowing what was next, much to the chagrin of my committee. Um, so at this time, my mental health had taken a really big hit. I was not doing great. And I was kind of like looking around and being like, what do I want out of my life and my career? And I started thinking about, the PIs at places like MIT and Harvard, and they do such incredible work with the incredible stress that many of them are under. And I realized, like, I don't want that. And I'm afraid of what that might turn me into. I don't think I would have been a great mentor in a situation of high stress, high pressure. And, I think that for those 10 years in which I was performing, neuroscience research in an academic setting, I was like so focused on climbing the ladder and so focused on whatever that next rung was. And when I finished my PhD and I was fortunate enough to have, publications in Nature, Cell and Science, and many, many doors open to me in that arena, that it wasn't what I wanted. I looked around and I was like, I don't think this is good for me. I don't think it's what I want long term. And so my third piece of advice is really take the blinders off and really look at the full landscape. Don't get so locked into like whatever one version of success you see or is modeled for you and that you miss the bigger picture. Chat with people, even if you're very certain that this is the path, as I was right up until the very end. Um, talk to people who are in related field, attend seminars like this, stay curious about the ecosystem around you. Because when I finished, I was like, I'm really, really good at sticking small things in rodent brains. Like, I don't know what else I can actually do with what I've done, what I've been trained in. And it took, quite a bit of time to figure out what was next for me. Um, and so what was next for me, I spent, um, a number of years actually a year in freelance consulting, explored a couple of digital paths. But before we get there, I think there was a piece of my PhD that was a little bit tangential to my academic research that was really important and really kind of gave me another thing that was tugging at my attention that I knew that I wanted to follow. And that thing was interstellate. One of the things that I loved most about, uh, my PhD work was being in a confocal room and looking at these really beautiful images, and, being in awe of how beautiful the brain is. And I started posting these on social media. This one, in fact, was made with my colleague at the time, Jillian Matthews. And this is a kind of a big experimental fail. Those neurons aren't supposed to look like that. They're supposed to be in one clean layer. The injection clearly didn't work and leaked everywhere. And we got this kind of random smattering. But I thought it was so stunning that I remember this image actually taking my breath away, as we were imaging it. And I realized that images like this can tell a story too, not just about, the brain and its complexity and how it works, but also about science. That science can be messy too. We think of it as this like sterile, A to B process, but especially for my PhD work, like, there was a lot of dead ends, a lot of things that, I remember my PhD advisor being like, we were doing an experiment and she's like, if this doesn't work, I might have to change my entire worldview of how the brain works. And sure enough, it didn't turn out that way, and we had to do a lot of digging to figure out, okay, this wasn't what we expected. This wasn't the simple answer. So how do we pivot from there? And so I think there's a lot to be said about how science is done and the failures and also the celebrations of when things do work. And so not only did I start sharing, some of these images that was originated from my research, but I started collecting them from researchers all around the world and using them as a vector for science communication. And what we ended up doing was, collecting them. We see if this will play, turned them into two published volumes. You can still find them online, and then ended up fundraising money from some very generous donors to print them out so that people could have them, and gave them away for free. And I still have a couple of copies here. I just have one of each left. But you can see that each image is used to explain a neuroscience concept or a brain region. And it was one of this project, I think, is one of the things that helped me finish my PhD because I needed something else to motivate me. And it was just so much fun to put together and to connect with folks in the community and see what they were working on. And this creative outlet was truly important for me, kind of getting my PhD over the finish line. It inspired me. It also made me realize that there's a lot in science communication that can be done that isn't being done. And, now I think it's more common that people don't think that science is fully finished until it's communicated. But I would say, 10 plus years ago, that wasn't quite the case, and, this project really was meaningful to me. Um, so my 4th piece of advice is find a side path that sparks joy. It could be a side hustle or a hobby or a passion project, something that helps you sharpen skills and could also set you apart. I'll say that when I started applying for jobs in communications, people were like, "Oh, okay, so you have a nature paper and a PhD from MIT, but tell me about this thing. Like, tell me about interstellate." I think it was something that was different. It certainly um, underscored some of my communications and creative communication skills. And now, as an employer, it's something that I look for in folks when I look at, job applications and resumes. Most of my staff do have PhDs, so I assume that almost all of them can write a technical manuscript, but what else can you do? And sometimes they have a really great, LinkedIn profile with social media content, or they wrote for a student paper. It doesn't have to be communications. It's whatever is meaningful to you and what interests you. And it might not even be something that relates to a downstream career path, but it is important to find something that brings you joy and helps you stand apart in thinking about career opportunities. Also, right now, I feel like we've covered a lot. Are there any questions before we keep going? We're like getting done with academic science and getting more into post PhD career stuff.
I love seeing all the interstellate pictures again, Caitlin.
I know.
You'll have our
I
queens too.
I actually just found a bunch of old prints, and we had a team dinner recently, and I brought them, and we got to. Some people took some home, but if anybody wants some, let me know. I have plenty.
That was the thing to get at SFN 2018 or something, right? 2010, 20?
Yeah.
Perhaps it was 2018, 2019.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was really fun. Hey guys, we'll keep going, but feel free to stop me if there's anything that you want to dig into further, if anything I can clarify. So let's get into communications. So like I said, I spent a number of years or a year and a half freelancing because I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards. And it's actually quite shocking. For a while, I was finishing up some PhD stuff, and one of the companies that was ended up being one of Stellate's first clients reached out to me, and I had used some of those tools and texts during my PhD, and they used to ask me to tweet things for them to help amplify as they were kind of in a startup phase back then. When I finished, I was quite bold at one point and said, "Well, why don't you hire me to help you with your content and your social media strategy?" And they said yes, and so I did that. I did some freelance work with Columbia and grantsmanship, and picked up some clients here and there. But really had pretty much decided that somewhere in the communication space was where I wanted to end up. But took a period of time where I chatted with different people and explored what was out there. But what is communications? Let's kind of talk about that first, because I think even when I got my first job in communications, I showed up on day one and had no idea what it was going to be. I think that's pretty common. Communications is quite a big umbrella term. It can include everything from brand to internal messaging, like employee comms, to like leadership and executive speeches, and even public storytelling. It houses a great number of things. And, it also includes these two other things that you see on the right, which is marketing and public relations, which are actually quite distinct. Marketing does tend to focus a little bit more on achieving short term goals. Those typically are around, behavior change or conversion or sales or increasing engagement in some way. So it targets a specific audience or group of potential customers, and is strategic and analytics driven in that manner. Public relations is more on the longer term. It's focused on building credibility and trust, and taking brand and content, to do so, to build reputation and just build trust and understanding, kind of like reputation management. And so, you know, at Stellate, we do a little bit of all of these pieces. I would say less marketing, more on the communications and PR side, but marketing is important and included in this, umbrella term. So something just to be, and this is not set in stone. Everyone has their own interpretation, but this is how we see it at Stellate. So what kind of jobs exist? I was really interested in more of the science communication side, but industry communications, it's everywhere. There's kind of two big broad umbrellas. There's in-house and there's agency. Agency is like what we do at Stellate, where clients hire us and we help them, whether it's an organization or an individual, with their communications. And we may work with, any number of clients at any given time. If you're staffed on my team, you may have 6 different clients that you're working on. Whereas in-house, you're at like a company or you're at Mount Sinai, where you're at an organization, you're solely responsible for in-house communications for that organization or group or individual. And job titles can include things like account manager, account supervisor, comms manager, PR manager. There's also investor relations, which sometimes falls under industry comms, which is a very specific kind of communication, where companies that have investors or are catering to investors, or IR. That's a specific type. Product comms, if you're trying to sell a product, there's also internal comms or employee comms, content marketing, obviously digital and social, and medical affairs. Just to give you a sense of decoding some of the, industry language out there. If we're really focusing in on science comms, common employers are biopharma, media, journals, nonprofit, academic institutions, tech startups, and agencies, and communications, PR, and medical writing. There's a couple of broad buckets like science writing, if you're a journalist or an editor, institutional comms, if you do research communications, job title could be research communications lead, public engagement, education manager, outreach specialist. There's obviously grant writing, science policy, nonprofit comms, visual and creative. And I think the unicorn that everyone wants to do as a science communicator. This is what I wanted to do when I was searching for that next thing, which is communicate taking science and translating it to the broader public. And despite that's what everyone wants to do, I also want to set expectations that there's very few jobs that do just that. So unless you're a science communications influencer or something like that, this is the unicorn. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we do at Stellate, and some of it is in this unicorn space, and a lot of it is across all of these different areas. And so we'll give you a little taste of what that looks like. So I was freelancing for a while, and the honest truth is my health insurance went up when I turned 30, and I was like, I can't afford to continue to freelance on my own. And also, I knew that I needed real training in communications to be successful long term. So I spent a number of years in biopharma and biotech communications, working at two different PR agencies. One was really focused on early stage kind of startup biotechs, and the one I transitioned to very large um, uh, biopharma companies like Novartis and Janssen. And so I was lucky enough to be able to have both of those experiences. Um, so what did I do? I did a lot. When you work at an agency, the beauty is you touch so many different things. You get a really well-rounded communications background, and so I'm very grateful for that. I Towards the end of my career, was kind of specialized in executive thought leadership, working with CEOs and assisting with their channels. So one example of that is Gail Boudreau, who at the time, was the CEO of Anthem, which is now Elevance. She didn't have a LinkedIn account. Um, my team designed her LinkedIn, launched it, was responsible for some of the first posts, and essentially, for a period of time, I was Gail Boudreau on LinkedIn. Um, I had sole, access to her channels. I helped manage her connection requests and worked with the broader teams to develop posts and content to help build up her thought leadership. What else did I do? I obviously wrote press releases. I worked with influencers on various campaigns. This one in particular was for a small company that had a therapy for sickle cell disease. And we did a national campaign where we went locally to um, uh, major cities to bring patients and advocates and advocacy groups together to raise awareness not only for sickle cell disease but for the treatment options that were available at that time, which then there weren't very many. I did a lot in social and digital. One of my main clients was Sage Therapeutics, who at the time had the first therapy for postpartum depression. They had recently gone through a rebrand, so got to be involved in that and really drive digital and social strategy for them. Did some more influencer campaigns, did some work with Janssen and schizophrenia, with mostly in digital and social, developing content and doing crisis comms management for this particular um, campaign. And last but certainly not least, we pitched news to the media. We took our clients' news, and we got them, as balanced or as best news coverage as we possibly could, introduce them to reporters, and help shape stories that made their way into the public eye. But I missed science. As you can probably tell, a lot of that wasn't really thinking about science anymore. And as much as I thought that I would love being closer from taking, preclinical science to impact, kind of harkening back to wanting to see, impact on patients when I thought that I was going to be a clinical psychologist, I didn't like it. I just never felt the connection. It never clicked for me. Um, and similarly, I looked at, my bosses at the time and I was like, I don't see myself doing that role. Um, and so my other piece of advice is don't be afraid to start over. I've done it a number of times. If you are, coming from science and you have like a PhD or a master's, you'll probably have to start over at some point if you leave. And you may begin at the bottom, as I did. I took entry level positions at communications agencies, but I did one notable thing is rise quickly, given the training and experience that I had, which, like I said, I thought I was really good at sticking small things in rodent brains, but, there are other soft skills that we don't really talk about in science that PhDs are really good at, which is working independently, thinking critically, synthesizing information that really helped me, in my career, uh, reset basically. So don't be afraid to start over. You probably will have to. And, use it for the experience. And even if you're like, I just need to get my foot in the door, that's fine. Or if you see it and be like, this is the long term path for me, that's also fine. Use it as a stepping stone to get to where you want to be. Take what is good, leave what is bad, and hopefully, find what is the next best thing for you. So here we are. I was kind of, really struggling with not feeling that this new career that I had started was it for me. And it was during this time that a, PI who had recently started her lab reached out to me and said, "Hey, I just started my lab. No one knows who I am, but I'm in the computational space. I'm only as successful as the people who use my tools and give me data so I can test my tools. Can you help me?" And at the time I was like, this is gonna be fun. So we did a lot in social media and basic brand building stuff, and it was so much fun. And I kind of realized I was like, I think there might be something here. Like, one, this is sparking joy. It's pulling my attention and it leverages my network. So I think there might be something here that could be a sustainable business. And that's what led me to Stellate. Stellate kind of smashes together two things that I really, really love, which is science and communications. So I'm really grateful that have been able to do this for the last 5 years. I launched Stellate back in 2020. At the time, I think I was staffed at like 160% because I was split across two teams, working way too many hours for something that I didn't feel connected with, and I just kept finding myself being pulled to this other freelance work that I was working on. And people always say, "What was the moment that you realized that you were going to start a company?" Um, Stellate, I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I certainly did not start to, set out to be a business owner. But I wanted to combine these two things somehow. And then my boyfriend, then husband, was like, "Do you want to get on my health insurance?" And that's when I started Stellate. It's not, pretty, or it's quite messy, but that was the moment that I was like, all right, let's see if this thing has legs. And I didn't know what shape it would take for a while. I was like, it's just going to be me or maybe me and one other person. And now we've grown into a much bigger organization. So, what is Stellate today? It's a boutique communications firm for scientists, by scientists. We are a small woman owned business. I was the founder and CEO, but I have two other partners, Gabby Serrato Marks, who is my co founder and was my first employee, and Lily Campbell is our creative director. She oversees everything web and design, and we co own Stellate together. Lily actually, when I was working at my former agency, that beautiful sage branding that you saw, she was part responsible for that, and she was the only designer who would give me brain imagery that actually looked like real brains, and so she has an interdisciplinary background in science and arts and was very grateful to eventually pull her over Stellate side, and so she oversees everything that is pretty, from our group. Um, so we work across research and academia. We also have nonprofit foundation work with foundations and larger science organizations, and we do take some for-profit clients if it's a good fit. So here is just a smattering of folks that we've worked with over the past 5 years. I think our unique value add is we don't just speak science, we embody it. A lot of our staff are PhD trained scientists, but we also have classically trained media specialists and creatives and web and design. So we blend comms, design, and deep scientific expertise in areas such as neuroscience and AI, public health, and rare disease. So this is a little bit about our team. Like I said, 69% have a PhD with an average year of 8 years in research, and we also have quite a bit of communications experience. So again, smashing these things kind of all together, and I think that's kind of the magic that makes us who we are. What do we actually do? We do a lot, and I'm not gonna go through everything, but one thing that we do for researchers is kind of integrated comms. It's like everything in the kitchen sink. We, put a polished touch on all communications efforts, whether it's grantsmanship or paper publications or social media or website content. We have ongoing retainer-based relationships with a number of academic investigators to help be their communications, counsel and tactical team. And this is a long-term client, Denise Kai, who we love working with. And this is one of my favorite quotes because she said that because of us and the things that we take off her plate, she can be a better mentor, a better wife, and a better mom, and that she can really focus on the things that matter to her, knowing that she feels supported in her career in science. And we've done a lot with Denise and other clients over the years, and it is some of my favorite kind of work that we've done. If we want to break it out into pieces, we do a lot of research and program management, systems and setup. We build, uh, operational backbones for labs and organizations in Notion. We set up, various ways to streamline some of the admin work, or we do admin work for our clients, whether that's, helping them reply to emails or schedule things. That's kind of part of our research program and management, flights, reimbursement, travel, all that kind of nitty gritty. About 30% of our work is in grantsmanship, helping identify opportunities and produce competitive grants. To date, we've helped our clients achieve over 52.5 million in funding, and work we continue to do and is, now incredibly important given everything that's going on in science funding. And so it's something that we're very proud of. We also help with helping papers get published. This is a good example. We worked with Shabani Sathi and her team out of Stanford to get the first pilot trial on ketogenic diet in serious mental illness published. It had been on her plate for a number of years, and she was having trouble with her clinical background getting it pushed over the finish line. So helped with that, and then also with the media and amplification that surrounded that. And we're really proud of the accurate reporting that was associated with this, and it is now the highest scoring research output from the journal. We do a lot in design. graphic design, presentation design, figures, schematics. Here's just one example of taking a client drawing and turning it into a published nature style figure. And then website and branding, which is a lot of the visible work that we see helping our clients build their brands online with logo, brand and website builds. And this is a recent example that we did for Manuela, actually. And, it's really fun to see these projects come to life. What does it actually look like? This is what my day looks like. We're a completely remote company, so I have Slack on one side. I do a lot in email and a lot of time tracking. It's not the sexiest. I spend about 8 hours right here in this chair, you know, in meetings, working on new business and client work. And I gotta be honest, what do I do versus the rest team? The reality is I don't actually do much of the work anymore. My team gets to do all the fun stuff. But I on the leadership side spend a lot of time doing company visioning, operations and HR. For me in particular, I do a lot of new business pitching, meeting with folks. And then on the billable side, things that are actually related to clients, I'll take on high stakes client meetings, do crisis comms, and review like high impact deliverables is basically what's in my purview these days. But if you work for me and you're on my accounts team, you get to do the fun stuff. There's some unbillable time like meetings and admin, but, you could be working on social media in the morning, a press release in the afternoon, and website content, to finish off your day. My team really gets to touch a lot of fun stuff related to science and supporting our clients. So that is what they get to do. So want to spend some time for question and answer. It's kind of a very brief career journey, brief look into, the communications landscape and what we do at Stellate. And I always love this quote from Bill Gates because, communications, public relations, especially, when I was making that transition from PhD, people were like, what are you doing? I even had someone like, say to me, "You have PhD in neuroscience. You could be curing Alzheimer's, and you're gonna do social media? Like, what are you doing?" And I think that this really speaks to the need for communications and public relations work, specifically in the sciences. I mean, I think everything that we're seeing, not everything, but a lot of what we're seeing with what's happened over the past year could be really strengthened or somewhat mitigated by, great science communication and showing the impact of science on society and human health. Um, so last piece of advice, no one is responsible for your career but you. This actually was taken, it was inspired by one of my employees, Paula Croxon. She's a president with me, and we've had this conversation over and over again. But I think it's important to call out is that it is your responsibility. Managers will support you and mentors can guide you, but only you can define what success looks like and take the steps to make that happen. So I think, I've done that along the way, not necessarily with full intention, but just because I wanted to do something that I loved and I'm grateful for it every day. But in retrospect, I think this is an incredibly important part. So that's it. I know it was a lot in 50 minutes. But here's my email. Happy to, chat with folks, our socials, our website. Feel free to check it out. But with that, thank you so much for your time today, for your attention. And I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone might have.